There is a common element that can often be found in any form of media, and that is escapism. And I don't mean the desire to transport ourselves away from our ongoing problems, but the part of the character's own struggles to prevent failure or a grim end. Hyperlight Drifter is a story of trying to escape the inevitable demise that the protagonist lives with. You change the pixels, the setting, or anything else, and in the mirror, it'll always be the developer himself. Hyperlight Drifter is something that surfaces its gameplay and its open-ended approach to progression on the bones of Zelda, along with the dash of Diablo. But in reality, it's another dimension of pain and heart problems, told in the guise of visual imagery and alarming animations. The Drifter is like a replicant that asks different questions and searches for answers in the same way how Roy desperately clings to more years of life. Both Roy and the Drifter fight and resist the course that has been set for them, both cursed by either natural or programmed circumstances. There are games that linger and infect your memories, and Hyperlight Drifter does this with its attention to detail in its pixelated eye candy, even in the context of its grim narrative. I find myself thinking about the game still ever since the beginning of this year when I finally started it up, where the interest had also materialized upon my decision to play it, and as a result I found myself swallowed up into a sea of memories, lensed in the perspective of our dying warrior. Flashes of momentary sequences painting of a picture of resistance against greater forces, all wearing faces of death, most notably the one who represents Judgment, the entity that constantly haunts the Drifter throughout the story. What players here will find from beginning to end is the lack of words or translatable voices. They may have even experienced some frustration in this, like a child watching their mother reading a bedtime story with only the pictures. Hyperlight Drifter's story can only be puzzled over with the suggestive pictures and animations that unfold. You go to a shell of a man drinking themselves to death and wondering why they're acting that way. You're then shown pictures of a man with hopes of a promising adventure, a rags to riches story coming true. Or perhaps he is searching for a new home and has only taken things of importance to him. Then suddenly you're shown other pictures of him being approached by a gang, only to be beaten and battered. And now you see not just a drunk, but a crestfallen shell whose only prized possession is the liquid to help him forget it. Environmental storytelling is something that is suggestive and ambiguous. You see it all the time in media, and when it's implemented with care, you get more stories on top of it, morphing the cocoon into a landmark telling a tale. Hyperlight Drifter is one of those games that will ignore your tastes or your preferences to storytelling. Similar to Zelda or Dark Souls, you pick apart the story forcibly. Instead of a narrator spoon-feeding you, you're pushing them aside so that you can open the carcass of this game's world wide open, greedily consuming the lore like a VaatiVidya fan. Hyperlight Drifter's isometric viewpoint invites depth into not just the gameplay style, but also the world that it inhabits. From lifeless giants across the four directions, the evidence of life somehow flourishing and getting by in the hub zone, species fighting for survival or sport, or hermits making homes near the edge of the abyss to not get swallowed up by the horrors that spawn from civilizations trying to play God. Through its world, you can tell something has gone horribly wrong here, and the game will never tell you what happened or why. You have all the time in the world to figure it out. The Drifter doesn't, though. He is no longer concerned by the machinations of the civilizations before him, or whether he may have made a mistake coming to this place. He is dying, and this is his last plan. I had a dream once where I found out that I had 4 months left to live, which understandably led to a lot of confusion and an overwhelming amount of decisions to make of how that time was going to be spent. I don't remember much more after that, but the Drifter, shown by his actions, would have done anything to get more time, to save himself. It's hard to know for certain because in reality, we don't really know how long we've got left, and the Drifter doesn't really know either. But he has one certainty, and it's that he only has enough time to beat the 4 bosses that will unlock the vault, because if he doesn't, then he will most certainly die. If not from the disease that's constantly killing him or the enemies that surround the whole place. Either way, the vault is his final answer, whether there is nothing or something. Death is a seamless effect in many different games. Hyperlight Drifter cruxes its entire narrative around the concept. Our character is on the verge of death at every turn. Killing the enemies is something we literally don't have the time to contemplate about whether it was the right thing to do or not. Does the Drifter deserve a cure after everything he's done? Is there even a cure at all? It's up to you to decide that on the morality of this game's world and the morality of the character. But ultimately, the Drifter marches onward in the vein of one final hope. The technological wasteland has many stories to tell, through its visual presentation, to its hidden monoliths and dungeons scattered across the place, its pictures showing the small but impactful stories that the characters have experienced. We see another ill-fated knight trying to bypass his fate, a rabbit hiding from the frogs who yearn for their skin and flesh, a priest preserving eggs to ensure that the next generation lives on. Stories of betrayal, survival, corruption, and desperation permeate the world of Hyperlight Drifter. Like Bastion, Hyperlight Drifter experiences its own calamities, brought upon by divine ambitions, leading to terrible consequences, and presumably the disease that is slowly killing the Drifter throughout his journey. Across the 4 places, the Drifter fights and opens his way towards the pillars, the mechanisms that are keeping the vault locked. The apocalypse seems to be colourful here, with different elements of nature defining the separate landscape, as you will see across your journey to the pillars, littered with different enemies that have nested themselves and are all waiting to kill you the moment that you arrive. With your sword swings, you swing like a dying man, fighting with everything you have. Attacking itself requires thought and considerable timing. Projectiles can go from 1 ball at a time to Ikaruga beginner-friendly levels of bullet hell gameplay. Beyond the effective and limited swordplay, you have a gun of your own choosing. The extra range itself helps in a pinch that requires accuracy in open space, whereas the sword, in contrast, requires closed-in spaces, even at the risk of a counterattack from the enemy. The combat can be engaging and sometimes be frustrating, in a similar way to how sometimes Dark Souls can be frustrating. Some of the enemies and the North boss can leave you red-faced even while the Drifter is coughing blood. The challenge is there, the tools are enough to get the job done, but the complete arsenal can only be discovered by personal tribulations and the desire to ingest everything that this world has to offer, from upgrades to new outfits, even to the one that requires 800 dashes in a row, an achievement that is easier to do with a well-placed crosshair on the screen, using the mouse instead of a gamepad. It has a story that requires a patient and understanding mind to appreciate it due to its personal attachment to it, its reflections being born from its creator. It doesn't mean that you have to like it, and it doesn't guarantee it either, but it can still be appreciated and respected, turning a life-threatening reality and manifesting it into an entirely new world, knowing that every day could be your last. That is something that is still worth respecting regardless of your feelings towards Hyperlight Drifter. The game's characters inherit different diseases and different problems. They're all trying to get by to survive. The Drifter does it by combing the world for any leg up to get himself closer to opening the vault. More health, more abilities, more powerful weapons to wipe out the more ferocious creatures and bosses that are a step up the food chain. The Drifter here is not Link, or the Dark Wanderer who was once a brave hero for Tristram, but a desperate soul searching for answers. It is not a game about being a hero, giving your life for the good of the inhabitants. Everything that you see in this game is a byproduct of the character's desperation to live. Would the Drifter kill everyone if it meant getting cured? How much of a price needs to be paid to save one's own skin? Answers that will never get answered in a game that has hope and hopelessness intertwined. We don't know a great deal about the Drifter himself, and in the context of this game's narrative it doesn't seem to matter because the disease in this world will drive one regardless to move forward just the same as any other person that has it. It's evidenced by another warrior, the Guardian, who also coughs up blood just the same, and yet fights and kills his way in the same manner. Hyperlight Drifter is an enjoyable game, challenging and difficult, manageable and thought-provoking in all the right ways. It never belittles your ability to understand a story, it just presents itself how it is. It tells its own story in its own design, in the hopes that it resonates with you, whether you're wearing a pacemaker or not. It has, like any other piece of media, faced criticisms. The truth is that it hasn't resonated with every person, which is understandable given that every game has the same effect. It was made as an expressive release of art to give birth to another dying soul from another world, whether you like it or not. Some people shouldn't be in the same room, and some people just aren't destined to enjoy Hyperlight Drifter, but anyone can relate to bodily problems, or just problems in general, whether it be a sore back, or a hereditary condition where your hope becomes to live until at least 50, heart disease or not. Hyperlight Drifter is about soldiering on regardless of what you have, not giving up even if there's no light at the end of the tunnel. The developer chooses to fight by spreading a message through creativity. The Drifter fights with his own Master Sword, not for the princess but for his own life. There is another piece of the picture in this game, but it's a dark horse in the narrative and also is a drifter. The alternate drifter dressed in a cloak, but with a dog-like head reflective of the jackal, the entity that appears in visions that also haunt both drifters. The alternate drifter is a character you unlock after beating the game, and in contrast to the sick and dying drifter, is able-bodied and healthy, is much faster with her attacks and isn't experiencing the same illness. There is, however, one scene where she does cough up blood, but everywhere else in the game she seems fine. Another important distinction too is also the difference between the intros, or the lack thereof in the alternate drifter. She doesn't have the same intro as the main drifter, and starts immediately in the Guardian's home. The goal and the objective is the same, but the reasons are different. It offers a slightly altered experience, but at the same time misses the fatal element that drives our main drifter forward. He can't walk away, his life is at stake. But what drives the alternate drifter? What purpose does she serve in this story? I'll leave that to the lore fiends to find out. The jackal itself is more of a beacon guiding the way, watching us with thoughts we have no perspective on. The visual storytelling aspect is not something everyone will appreciate or resonate with. In certain circumstances, it's generally preferable to have some text at least. Sometimes spoon feeding is fine when you've worked 8+ hours and have had a nap for over an hour. The visual approach to its storytelling, however, is comprehensible and leaves multiple rooms for interpretation. This invites a potentially infinite pool of theories that are still being debated to this very day, like in the way people debate the lore and world building of the Souls games. Hyperlight's world is relatively small in both its dense design to its average playtime. It's not going to force you to commit CRPG levels of playtime. It starts and finishes at the right amount of playtime, just long enough to give you a lasting impression if you've made it to the very end. I never once felt like I had to rush to the end just so that I could move on to something else. The pacing of the game felt just right once the steps towards the goals made sense. Clearing one area made the other areas clockwork, where you only really have to just worry about the unique challenges and the enemies that laid before you. In a lot of the quiet moments of this game, before the combat even shows its isometric face, the Vangelis-centric music will calmly make waves throughout the levels. Some of them might even become your own love theme during your memories of Green. To some people, this game may be deemed a disaster piece, to mock the idea that it is a masterpiece, to deem it overrated carried by its hype in 2016, but the creative talents and their synergy, the drive of Alex Preston's mission to make the best game he could, with what time he might or might not have, ultimately culminated in one of the best indie games of the decade. 2016 was a tidal wave of indie giants clashing in a clash for the throne. One did it with a Harvest Moon fetish, another did it with a larger-than-life ambition that forced the studio into years of updates and expansions. Dark Souls would be squished into a 2D format for the very first time by Scar Studios, a turn-based game where you send insane people to a sanitarium just to send them back to another hellish dungeon, made 2016 a year of excitement for the indie industry itself. At this time too, I had my AAA fix with Dark Souls 3 and Doom 2016, with the latter being my game of the year for that time. But Hyperlight Drifter had escaped my grasp, and it would be 8 years later where I'd finally make up for it, creating this video where I've rambled on about my own feelings towards this game. Hyperlight Drifter is also a reminder that indie games aren't always just made to make ends meet, to ascend to the gates of the AAA kingdom or hope for a $2 billion deal, but to accomplish a personal goal, to make a dream come true. Hyperlight Drifter explores the themes of terminal illness, and what we can do about it, or at the very least, how we can live with it, and find a way to move forward regardless. We fight it for so long in the game, but in the end, there only comes a moment of acceptance and a sad ending to close the chapter. The Drifter reaches the Vault, after all of the bosses have been scattered to the void. The Vault is his final destination, where its guardian is of his nightmares, the Judgment Entity. The defeats that come from this battle become progressively frustrating, but we don't give up because of how far we've come. This is our last chance to save ourselves. We strike the final blow, and he is gone, giving us the opportunity to kill the source of this madness. The vault starts to collapse, and we find ourselves right back where we started, the bonfire that kept us warm in the midst of the ruined landscape, only for it to be the Drifter's final resting place, with the Jackal being witness to our demise. In those last moments, the Drifter both lost and won. He lost his life in the hope for a cure when it was never there, but won over his fear of the Judgment Entity that had hypothetically killed him time and time again, and he could die happy from that result. The world had also changed in his absence, but we don't know the significance of that change. The deeds that were done and how the community in this new world feel about it are up to them. Whether the Drifter is a hero or not is not the point of the game, but rather that it is about the driving force that ultimately pushes us in our final test. The Drifter will be forgotten to time, but what mattered most to him is that he did the best he could in the circumstances that placed him there, and that's all we can really ever hope for, regardless of whether there is a cure for the disease or not. Ever since Dark Souls, I've come to appreciate settings and worlds that don't give you everything on a platter. It doesn't treat you as an important being, but still respects you enough to figure out things yourself. This leaves infinite mystery and ambiguity, where some answers or theories may seem reasonably sound, paired with information that may seem to add up but will continue being debated over. Hyperlight's lore and story is left to a lot of interpretation, but one element is absolute, and it is the Drifter's search for a cure, all the while fighting an entity that haunts him until the very end. The rest is left to your own devices, giving you the opportunity to make your own analysis of the other characters, the enemies, the dungeons, and the civilizations that once inhabited the place. It's a beautiful world, showing some of the most detailed and pleasing pixel work I've seen in a game. Every place is a constant treat that promises not just eye candy, but interesting landmarks that raises questions that lead to further exploration of its story and its universe. The combat itself is also enjoyable, but for me, it's just the icing on the top. And at times, it can be difficult, and it's easy to get overwhelmed at times, to get punished, only to die and wake up in an area before the combat zone. It's what helps you drive forward, but it's not the reason why the game has left an impression on me. Its brightest and shiniest diamonds are in the guise of how it presents its world and its story. Everything else has just been icing on the top. It's been the equivalent of adding M&Ms or gummy bears to a delicious ice cream, basically. I've experienced games with great level design, but not much substance for me to care to continue on, because there's nothing to puzzle over or figure out in the world, something that I've experienced quite a lot in certain genres. Hyperlight's world, though, makes me ask questions. It makes me search far and wide for plausible theories that puts the questions to rest. This is a good sign of world design and environmental storytelling. It is important to add context to your world, reasons to care, reasons to find and discover things, places of interest that make you wonder and ask questions, even if you think the story isn't exactly that good or that important. Good story or otherwise, the purpose and functions of the levels are important, and Hyperlight Drifter does both beautifully throughout its well thought out use of environmental storytelling and well thought out design. When I see the giants, I wonder how much it took for the people to stop them, what it would have been like playing as the Guardian, wondering if the rest of the world had the same apocalyptic fate. 8 years later, and people are still talking about this game, and for good reason. A lot of indie games have had the luxury of appearing timeless, thanks to their foundations being built on retro-inspired graphics through the presence of pixel art. But it's more than just that. It's also the foundations built on passion. Hyperlight Drifter is one of those many indie titles that had a story to tell. It had its own unique moments of crisis, whether it was a heart problem or wondering if they even had what it took to make the game of their dreams. The industry itself is something of total victories and colossal defeats, but all share unique experiences that refilled an ocean for those that wanted to swim into more interesting waters, most notably into the indie ocean, that either offered something entirely new or something that was a blast from the past. The indie industry is now full of Hyperlight Drifters, of Cupheads, Hollow Knights, Vampire Survivors, Minecrafts and Terrarias, success stories that provide a window into quality gaming and forms of art, that also provide a portal to smaller and harder to find diamonds in the mines. Whether you think the game is art is up to you, but the impact it's made is undeniable in the indie scene, and the game is a testament to how far you can go to making a game without the use of words, in a world that can manage just fine without them, all the while delivering a rich and enjoyable experience to those that are looking for a Zelda fix, another adventure in a mysterious land full of secrets, that forces you to discover them yourself. Maybe the story won't click for you, maybe the combat won't do anything for you, but at the very least you may recognize that it was a game made with genuine love and care, where the team believed in what they were making. That kind of passion can only be found with a beating heart, even if it's a heart attached to a machine. Stay tuned and thank you for watching.